Hello, and welcome to our first episode in Your Path to Sell, our video series dedicated to smart strategies for making the most of this critical step in your business's future. I'm Richard Frank, Chief Marketing Officer at Capstone Strategic, and I'm joined by Brian Goodhart, our Director of M&A Advisory Services. Brian brings more than 20 years of experience conducting mid-market transactions on both the buy and sell sides. He works side by side with clients throughout the deal-making process to develop actionable transition strategies that maximize value and realize a client's strategic transition objectives. Brian, in these conversations, we'll focus in on three questions our viewers need to be thinking about. So starting off, Brian, what are most business owners getting wrong right now when they think about selling?
Uh, it's a very good question. I think there are a few things that most business owners don't fully appreciate, I would say, rather than maybe get wrong. The first thing I would say is that many of them view the sale or transition of a business as an event and not as a process. And what I've learned with over 20 years of working with business owners is they attempt to move their business from one owner to another, regardless of how you intend to do it. It is a process. It is a process that involves many steps. It involves experienced professionals, and it's a process with real downsides if done incorrectly. So that's the first thing I would say they get wrong. The other thing I think that a lot of business owners don't fully appreciate is that transactions take teams. You really cannot do it yourself. It is just exceptionally challenging. And they take teams because they cover lots of different areas, and there are many facets to a transaction. There are accounting implications, tax implications, there are leadership implications. And whatever type of transaction we're positing, it's really necessary to bring in experienced professionals to help us navigate and quarterback this because we have to do all this while keeping our business performing at the same level. We don't want to disrupt that business. So in order to do it effectively, we really need some experienced professionals who can help guide us, help offer us good counsel, but also help just lighten the load as we work our way through this, as I said, very involved process.
So when you look at deals that go well versus ones that struggle, is there something in common with that? Like what do you see often driving that difference?
So that's it's a good question, and I think that each deal certainly has its own dynamics, and each business owner certainly has their own. They bring to the transaction their own baggage, if you will. So it's a little difficult to say that there are some things that apply to everyone. In general, though, there are some things we see that really do not portend a good transaction process. One is a lack of involvement. If you, as the business owner, are not fully engaged in the process, it can be very, very challenging. Even with a great team, even with motivated buyers, it can be very, very challenging if the seller or the primary driver behind the sale is not fully engaged. Another thing would be a lack of transparency. If you, as a business owner, are not as transparent as you could be with your own advisors or with an interested party, even if that's an internal transition, if you were transacting that business to your children, a lack of transparency is certainly a red flag and something that we are very curious about and somewhat cautious about. So engagement, transparency, and then follow through. If you have identified things that you want from a transaction, if you and your deal team have assembled a transaction that meets those needs, if you don't follow through on those things, if you're not being responsive, those are some pretty serious red flags. So again, I would say those three things: engagement, transparency, follow through. Those are the things that we really have to be very, very cognizant of that could destroy even the best transaction with the most motivated parties and with the most qualified deal teams.
When you mentioned the idea of involvement,
Mhm.
like why would a seller not be involved in that process? Are they're distracted by the day to day of the business, or is there some other thing that could sometimes creep in?
So there could be a number of reasons. Sometimes, especially when we have complicated shareholder groups and complicated decision-making processes inside companies, we may have people who are more or less engaged. If, for example, you're a CEO, but you're not a majority shareholder, you may be less interested in a transaction happening because it may not benefit you personally. So there's an incentive mismatch that could occur. Some people just simply don't get very involved because they think it should be easier than it is, and I can just have my attorneys handle it. That certainly happens all the time. They think it should be easy. I just should be able to provide my financials, and that's all you need. You should be able to assess this business on your own, and then you should just present me a deal that I can just sign. That's not the way it works because deals are very complicated transactions. Even the smallest business sale is infinitely more complex than the largest real estate sale or home sale you've ever heard of. Because businesses are living, breathing entities. They have, they have suppliers, they have customers, they have employees, they have a whole web of stakeholders that will be impacted by this transaction. All of those stakeholders have to be accounted for when we're crafting a transaction. So there's simply nothing easy about it. And it's something that really requires a lot of effort. And again, so when we see people that aren't as involved, it's often because they don't understand that, they don't care, or maybe they're disincentivized to make a transaction happen.
Mhm. So if someone is even thinking about selling in the next few years, what should they be doing right now?
So that's a very good question, a question we get quite often. And the first thing I would do is understand a very fundamental idea, which is that your readiness is not simply about you. You have to think of readiness as three things. It's your personal readiness, the business's readiness, and the market's readiness. And you have to be aware of all three aspects. So what do I mean by that? Your personal readiness is just that. Are you ready to begin to step away from this business? And do you feel that it's a good time for you personally, professionally, financially, what have you? So the rule of thumb I use there is I ask people, how soon until you would like to be away from this business, separated completely? And then work backwards from there, realizing that a good qualified buyer will probably want you to stick around for some period of time during a transitional phase. That could easily be 6 months, it could be 18 months, it could be 24 months. Depends on who the buyer is, what your relationship with them is, what your desires are, etc. You also then have to tack on the time to complete the transaction. So transactions take 6 to 12 months and maybe shorter, but again, if we had to maybe estimate on the outside, that's what I would tell people, 6 to 9 to 12 months. So if you say, for example, I would like to be completely done with this business in 2 years, I would tell you probably need to start to think about it right now because any interested buyer is going to want you to stick around for probably a year, probably take you 6, 12 months to find a good buyer to execute a transaction. So work your way back from there. So that's personal readiness. Business readiness is the question of how ready is your business? Is your business performing at a level that would allow it to be transacted or that would allow others to look at it favorably in a transaction? Are we profitable? Is our revenue growing? Are we hitting those performance metrics that people in our industry look to? The third aspect is the market's readiness. And this is just acknowledging the fact that sometimes markets appreciate businesses and other times they don't fully appreciate them. And this has been true since the beginning of time. Markets fall in and out of love with businesses. And so we have to be aware that sometimes there's going to be a real interest and desire in the marketplace for businesses like ours, and other times there may be less appetite for that. So given that it's across these three vectors, what do you do? Well, the rule of thumb I use is I tell people to look for two of them. If you get two of those three, it's probably time to go and enter a transaction. So if you're ready and the market's ready, you should probably move. If the business is ready and you're ready, it's probably time to move. If all three of them are in alignment, it is definitely time to go because you may never have that alignment again.
Hmm.
So that's what I would tell people about readiness.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, thank you, Brian, for this great conversation. And thank you to our viewers for joining along. If you're a business owner and selling your company is something that may be on the horizon, let's talk. Reach out to Capstone Strategic on LinkedIn. You can email us at growth@capstonestrategic.com, or old fashioned style, you can call us 703-854-1910. Until next time, thanks for joining us and have a great day.